Hello and welcome to Weather Talk Weekend. I am your host for today, Tristan Van Beem, and I am also here with Braden Siu, who is going to be our meteorologist for today. And the topic of today's Weather Talk Weekend is going to be hurricanes.
Yep.
Now, Braden, as you know, as a meteorologist, hurricanes can be quite a destructive force in weather, and it's affected many people over the years, and there's just a lot of ways that hurricanes can do damage and affect people's lives. So I was just wondering, could you kind of get us into the anatomy of a hurricane and what that all means?
Yeah, absolutely. Hurricanes, they are something that they feed off of warm waters, basically. Whenever we talk about hurricanes and their formation and all of that stuff, really one of the biggest things that you look for is
Mhm.
all of that warm water that we have out there. And our hurricanes that we get here in East Texas, they come from the Atlantic basin. So if you have warm ocean temperatures out there in the Gulf, out in the Caribbean, or the Atlantic, those really help to fuel those hurricanes. And something else that you look for is low wind shear. Low wind shear really allows those storms to consolidate and get their act together. And also, you look for several other factors in terms of talking about tropical waves, that sort of thing. And as we look out there right now, you can see that we don't really have much going on across the Gulf, just some unsettled weather out towards Florida, but nothing of any concern out there. And as we turn our attention here to the tropical Atlantic, again, nothing really showing signs of any immediate formation, but you do notice all of that thunderstorm activity over towards the African coastline. That could result in some development here as we go through the next several days. So, here is a look at what we're seeing right now in terms of the rest of the season. So, we're looking for a total of about 13 to 18 named storms, 6 to 9 of which become hurricanes, 2 to 5 of those become major hurricanes. So, we're going to be looking at the potential there for a pretty active hurricane season for 2025. And that is the forecast from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. As we look at CSU, which is Colorado State University, their forecast right in the middle of that 16 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and then 3 major hurricanes. The average is 14 named storms, 7 of which become hurricanes, and 3 of those become majors. And as we look at what we've seen storm name wise so far, this is the name list for the 2025 season. We've already checked off 4 of those names. So the next name on the list would be Aaron. Nothing immediately showing signs of becoming Aaron, but we certainly do have some areas to watch out there. One area to watch right there between the eastern coast and into the Bermuda area, right there in the middle, only about a 10% chance of formation over the next 7 days. And then another area way out in the open Atlantic does have about a 50-50 shot at becoming our next named storm as we go through the next 7 days. So while the Atlantic is a little active right now, there's nothing immediately showing any potential of making landfall here on the U.S. coastline. So, some good news there. The tropics are heating up, but in terms of any impacts for us here in East Texas, not really seeing that here for the foreseeable future.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Braden,
hmm
for giving us that update. Now, I just wanted to go ahead and ask, could you kind of go in detail about the anatomy of a hurricane?
Yeah.
What really causes it to form? Because I'm really curious about that. You know, its growth,
hmm
its its landfall, excuse me, and just really the process of how hurricanes come to be so powerful and dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we talked about those warm waters, low wind shear, that sort of thing, those all factor into really strengthening a storm. But what you need, something that happens a lot out in the Atlantic basin as far as the hurricane season goes, is you get these tropical waves that kind of move off the African coastline and they move across the tropical Atlantic. Some of them kind of fizzle out, others don't. They tend to strengthen and eventually become these closed areas of low pressure. And then the factors such as warm waters, low wind shear,
Hmm.
the Coriolis force of the Earth's turn, just all that comes together to create these areas of low pressure. And then they can strengthen based on the environmental conditions that they're in. So if they're in an area with high humidity, low wind shear, some of them even have upper level high pressure that sits right on top of them, which can really aid in outflow. And that causes them to intensify. And that's when you start to see those Cat 3, 4, 5 hurricanes. So, certainly, lots of factors go into hurricanes themselves and their formation, but of course, we all know all the impacts that those kind of storms can bring.
Oh, yes. I mean, we've seen over the years thousands of Texans really be,
Hmm.
misplaced out of their homes and just have to, and they kind of are at the front end of all this damage,
Yep.
especially those who kind of live towards the coast. Maybe you're closer to Mexico, that kind of area. These hurricanes really have an effect. So that's why I want to go in and just go over some of the real
Hmm.
world impacts that these hurricanes have. As far as like wind damage
Yeah.
or what's it called, inland flooding and just other flooding and stuff like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up some video of some past hurricanes and just kind of go in a little bit of depth of how that works. I mean, I did some research on my own. I'm no
Hmm.
meteorologist by any point, Braden, but I did decide to, hit the books and kind of learn a little
Yeah.
bit about myself. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these hurricanes. Now, so this information that I'm getting is from the National Weather Service, and we're going to go ahead and talk about some wind damage that can be caused by hurricanes. According to the National Weather Service, hurricane force winds can destroy buildings and mobile homes. They can down trees and power lines. Winds can also transform signs, roofing, and small items into dangerous flying missiles. Winds associated with hurricanes are more intense near the center of the storm as the storm moves inland. Winds rapidly decrease, but hurricane force winds can be felt as far as 150 miles inland. Now, that is absolutely insane. I've never personally experienced any kind of storm like that, and I'm thankful for that and I'm grateful for that. But, that is not always the case for some people. Now, we're going to go ahead and move into storm surges. I had no idea what storm surges were until last night, but they're actually very interesting. According to the National Weather Service, a storm surge is an abnormal rise of water generated by a storm. Now, this is generated over and above the predicted astronomical tides. Storm surges should not be confused with a storm tide, which is defined as the water level that rises to a combination of storm surge that coincides with normal high tide, resulting in storm tides reaching up to 20 feet or more in some cases. That is some very high water. Now, let's go ahead and move into inland flooding. Now, there is a difference between just normal flooding and inland flooding. Your normal floods is what kind of impacts bodies of water, such as, rivers, oceans, lakes, streams, all that kind of stuff, and just really kind of impacts that habitation over there. But inland flooding is the water that actually comes up into homes, into cities, and as you can see on your screen, the water level is halfway up people's houses and just flooding through their fences and stuff like that. So this is more inland flooding, what we're seeing on the screen here. And according to the National Weather Service, in recent decades, inland freshwater flooding has become the most deadly hazard produced by tropical cyclones between 1970 and 1999. Nearly 60% of the deaths due to floods associated with tropical cyclones occurred inland from the storm's landfall. Now, to talk about basic general flooding, like I said earlier, that just kind of goes into effects on oceans and rivers and streams. I try to do some research about how that affects our body of water, but there aren't a whole lot of there's not a whole lot of research available and a lot of studies available to actually see how it damages, sea life or ocean life. It really just kind of can part sediment, and that's pretty much the only information that I was able to find on that topic. But now let's go ahead and move into the economic impact behind hurricanes. Now, as I would just mentioned, there it has a lot of implications on land and people and stuff, but what are the economic impacts that hurricanes leave behind years after they have hit land? Because as we know, people are able to bounce back, they can rebuild their homes, they can find somewhere else to live, but the economy takes a lot longer to really bounce back and get back to normal. So I'm going to go ahead and show some different clips, as you can see here. Now you can see all this damage that was caused by hurricanes. Not exactly sure which hurricane this is, but homes are going to be damaged, roads are going to be damaged. So let's see what kind of economic impact hurricanes can leave behind. Now, this information is from hurricanescience.org, and according to them, of all recorded weather disasters in U.S. history, tropical cyclones, also known as hurricanes, occurring in the North Atlantic, Central North Pacific, and Eastern North Pacific Oceans, have caused the most deaths and destruction. 115 weather climate disasters in the U.S. from 2020 to 2024, with losses exceeding $1 billion. The total approximate cost of damages from weather and climate disasters in the U.S. from 1980 to present, as of February 2025, is $2.915 trillion. The average annual number of weather and climate disasters from 2020 to 2024. In 2024 alone, the US experienced $27 billion disasters, and that was a total of 23 $27 billion disasters. Now, the environmental impact. As we see, it can leave behind a strong economic impact and really make it hard for cities to rebuild after hurricanes. But let's see how it impacts, animals around us, how it impacts overall communities, wildlife, such as trees and plants and everything that needs to breathe around us. How is that impacted by hurricanes? Now, also according to the hurricanescience.org, in addition to impacting individuals, homes, and communities, hurricanes also have a profound effect on the environment, especially estuarine, sorry, let me try that again. Estuarine and coastal habitats. Hurricanes generate strong winds that can completely defoliate forest canopies and cause dramatic structural changes in wooded ecosystems. Animals can either be killed by hurricanes or impacted indirectly through changes in habitat and food availability because of high winds, storm surges, and intense rainfall. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up some clips of, just some devastating damages that we've seen in hurricanes throughout the years. As you can see, I'm not really sure what hurricane this is, but people are having to ride boats to get around and just to get away from their homes, and they're pretty much just losing all of what they know here. I'm pretty sure these are apartment complexes and homes such as that. So as you can see, hurricanes are no joke. They really do leave behind a lasting impact. Alrighty, well, now that we've kind of gotten some background and some more knowledge into hurricanes, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. And then when we get back, we're going to also have Braden talk more about the science behind hurricanes and really just see what leads up to this and how you can actually prepare yourself for hurricanes and what to do amidst these disasters when we come back from the break. Hello and welcome back to Weather Talk Weekend. Once again, I'm your host Tristan Van Beem for today, and I am also joined with Braden Seo, who's going to be talking about hurricanes. Now, we just came back from the break, and earlier we kind of talked about the science behind hurricanes and what really causes them to be so damaging. Now we're going to go into some hurricane misconceptions. Now, Braden, I just want to ask, what are some common hurricane misconceptions that you hear from either everyday people or
Mhm.
just people who are curious about weather and hurricanes overall?
There's plenty of misconceptions when it comes to hurricanes. I think one of the biggest ones that we really should discuss is about how hurricanes don't just affect coastal areas. These are not just storms that hit the beaches or the coastlines or, maybe up to 5 miles inland. These are storms that can travel hundreds of miles inland. We're talking potentially even places like the Midwest can deal with remnants of hurricanes, and that is in the form of even some wind damage, tornado outbreaks, and some flooding. And of course, we know this here in East Texas. We don't have any beaches. We don't have a coastline here in East Texas, but we do have a Gulf that is down to our south by a couple hundred miles. And whenever these storms move up, they have plenty of momentum and they move up into the area. We don't need to be right there on the coast to really feel those impacts. We saw that last year with Beryl. We had a major tornado outbreak, some flash flooding, and some wind damage. We've seen it in the past with Hurricane Ike. We saw it with Hurricane Rita. And even before that, we've had several instances of the remnants of tropical systems moving up through East Texas. So, one of the main things that is really misconceived about these storms is that you don't have to be right on the coastline to really get affected. And then some other misconceptions about hurricanes is that there's a lot of people that think that if you tape your windows or something like that, then that'll help to kind of keep them from breaking in the wind. Well, really, the only way you can truly prevent your windows from breaking in a hurricane is to have shutters because the tape really doesn't do much. Instead, that just will make for bigger glass shards to be flying in the wind. So honestly, it becomes a little bit more dangerous in terms of that. So certainly not something that you want to be doing. You don't want to tape your windows. Make sure that you shutter your windows. That is really the only preventative measure to prevent your windows from breaking. And of course, there's plenty of other misconceptions. People think that wind is the biggest thing that a hurricane produces. And in fact, the deadliest issue with hurricanes is the water, and
Right.
that is from storm surge as well as the inland flooding.
Mhm.
So, yes, wind damage is a major issue when it comes to hurricanes, but it's not the main killer. It does cause a lot of property damage, a lot of issues, even well inland. But as far as what causes the most deaths historically, that has been the storm surge, which is primarily a coastal issue. But the storm surge, especially on the Texas and Louisiana coastlines, where it's so low for so many miles inland, you can get that water traveling all the way up to the Interstate 10 corridor. So there's plenty of cities down there that could be inundated by that storm surge. But as far as freshwater flooding, that inland flooding,
Mhm.
that's what we tend to see here in East Texas. And that is a very dangerous and deadly aspect of a hurricane that a lot of people don't know is the deadliest part of those storms.
Thank you so much, Braden, for sharing
Hmm.
that. That's some very insightful information. And I used to live in California, so I never
Hmm.
really worried about hurricanes. And then when I came to Texas, I was like, I won't live near the coast. I'll be fine. But now that I've actually done some research into this, I'm learning that I'm not scared of hurricanes, but
Hmm.
I do want to be prepared.
Yeah.
So, and that is what we're going to talk about in our next segment, right? Whenever we kind of go over some other misconceptions. Now, I know you just heard Braden talk about some, but I actually was able to find some misconceptions myself
Hmm.
through research and some other stuff like that. So, I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into it and talk about some common misconceptions that people have either all over the country or all over the world. And these are going to be by the Climate Adaptation Center. So, I'm going to go ahead and play some video for y'all, and then I'm going to go ahead and dive into those misconceptions. All right. So the first misconception that most people commonly have with hurricanes, and once again, this is from the Climate Adaptation Center. The misconception is if I don't live on the coast, I'm safe. Now we just heard Braden talk about that, but I'm gonna go into a little more detail right here. Now they say that it is easy to think that hurricanes are only a problem for beachfront properties, but storms do not stop at the shoreline. Some of the worst impacts sometimes happen while inland, where wind, flooding, and tornadoes can cause just as much damage. Now, I'm going to go a little bit off of what they said here and just say that honestly makes so much sense to me. Because when you think about it, if you live on the coast, you're kind of at the front lines and it'll just wash right past you. But then I feel like the more powerful waves and water and wind impact kind of hits you inside of the coast. Now, they actually brought up an example with Hurricane Harvey that happened in 2017. They say this was a perfect example of how people were unprepared for the hurricanes. They said it made landfall in Texas as a major hurricane, but its slow movement dumped so much rain that areas hundreds of miles were devastated by flooding. Now, that's one thing that people also don't think about is the rain impact from hurricanes. I know that it might kind of be assumed, but I feel most people kind of focus on the wind and just how it affects the coastlines. But the rain can be actually very damaging. As I talked about earlier, it floods bodies of water and it can just make a lot of water rush into areas, as you can see on your screen here. Roads and just cities and homes are just filled with water in these times. Now, let's go ahead and check out another common misconception is that my house made it through the last big storm, so I'll be fine. Now, according to the Climate Adaptation Center, this could actually be false and could get you into some trouble. They say that no two hurricanes are exactly the same. A house that survived one storm could be in serious danger for another. Even if it is the same category, storm surge, wind speeds, and rainfall amounts can vary dramatically from one system to the next. Building codes have also changed over the years. Older homes may not meet modern standards, and this can make them more vulnerable to high winds and rising water. Regular maintenance and upgrades like storm shutters and reinforced roofing can make all the difference when the next hurricane comes through. Now, that was definitely some very insightful misconceptions to learn about. That's one thing that I always kind of thought about too is, you see these homes that actually make it through the hurricanes and that actually survive. But it's some good information to know that even though your home made it through once, there's potential that it could not make it through the next time. So that's some very great information to have. Now, we are going to go ahead and just jump into asking Braden, how do meteorologists track hurricanes? How far out in advance can you see them, and what do we really know about hurricanes before they actually hit us?
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing before we jump into that. Another misconception
Mhm.
is that if you get the eye of the storm, people think, oh, it's over.
Mhm.
No, the eye
Absolutely.
means you're right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So you've still got the whole other half of that storm to come through. So, never a good idea to venture outside if you're in the middle of the storm. But as far as how we track hurricanes, there's lots of different ways. We use a variety of computer models to
Mhm.
kind of track these waves as they come across the Atlantic. And what I mean by waves is not like ocean waves, but
Mhm.
instead atmospheric waves of low pressure. And so these waves can consolidate, become tropical systems, and then computer models take in all of this atmospheric data, such as temperature, wind direction, wind speeds,
Mhm.
all kinds of stuff. And take that all into account and then print out a forecast of where this storm may go. And they do that multiple times. These are called ensembles.
Mhm.
And so we have lots of those that give us kind of an idea of where that storm may go. So for that reason, it's never just a pinpoint forecast. You see that cone of uncertainty that we talk about every hurricane season. That's because it's not an exact forecast. You just can't do that with how much uncertainty exists. In some storms, there's more uncertainty than others, but we do use those computer models as a idea, really a really good idea for the most part of giving us where that storm, the center of the storm, is going to track. So this cone of uncertainty tells you
Mhm.
that most of the time the forecast calls for the center of the storm to be within that cone of uncertainty. But that doesn't mean that impacts can't be felt outside of that cone of uncertainty because they certainly can. We've seen that time and time again. The cone is strictly for where the center of the storm will track. And that is all taken into account those computer models, the current movement of the storm, all that good stuff. So we have seen East Texas in that cone of uncertainty before. We will certainly see East Texas within that cone of uncertainty again. So things are going to be a lot easier to watch in the coming years because as we've gone through years, as models have gotten better, the cone has shrunk in size. So back in, say, the 2005 hurricane season, the cone of uncertainty was huge. It basically covered, several states. Now, in 2025, that cone of uncertainty is much smaller as forecasts have gotten a lot better. And as far as how far in advance we can kind of track these systems, days, even up to a week in advance, we can have a pretty good idea of where these storms are going. But once you get beyond that 7 day forecast, it really becomes a little uncertain
Mhm.
as to exactly where that storm's going to go. You can have a general idea, but it's always too early beyond 7 days, even within 7 days, to narrow down an exact place that those storms are going to be making landfall. But the difference with hurricanes is you have multiple days to prepare rather than, if we're talking about a tornado or something, then you only have minutes to prepare for those. But hurricanes, that's why we can evacuate, we can do all that stuff because you can see it coming and you have a pretty good idea with days of lead time.
Well, thank you so much, Braden,
Mhm.
for telling us, how meteorologists think when it comes to hurricane season and what to do in hurricanes. And speaking of what to do before, during, and after hurricane, that's what we're going to talk about when we come back from the break. We're going to talk about hurricane preparedness, what to do whenever you first hear of a hurricane, what you should do during it, and what you should do following a hurricane in order to benefit yourself. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into that break. And when we come back, we will give you our final thoughts on preparedness, and we'll see you right after the break. Hello and welcome back to Weather Talk Weekend. Now, as I said before the break, I was going to talk about some how to be prepared for hurricanes and stuff like that, what you can do before, what you can do during, and what you can do after. Now, I did do some more research on that, and this is going to be from the National Weather Service. So let's go ahead and just dive right in and see what they have to say about how to be prepared for these hurricanes. Now, according to the National Weather Service, the best time to prepare for a hurricane is before hurricane season begins, typically on June 1st. It is vital to understand your home's vulnerability to storm surge, flooding, and wind. Here is your checklist of things to do before hurricane season begins. Know your zone. Do you live near the Gulf or Atlantic coast? Find out if you live in a hurricane evacuation area by contacting your local government/emergency management office. or by checking the evacuation site website. Put together an emergency kit and put together a basic emergency plan. Check emergency equipment such as flashlights, generators, and storm shutters. Write or review your family emergency plan before an emergency happens. Sit down with your family or close friends and decide how you will get in contact with each other, where you'll go, and what you'll do in an emergency. Now, let's talk about what to do during a hurricane. The National Weather Service also says secure your home, cover all your home's windows. Permanent storm shutters offer the best protection for windows. A second option is to board up windows with 5/8 inch exterior grade or marine plywood, built to fit and ready to install. Buy supplies before the hurricane season rather than waiting for the pre-storm rush. Stay tuned. Check into websites for all the latest storm updates, and check all local and government emergency management offices to find out what is going on. Now, what to do after a hurricane. Continue listening to the National Association of Weather Radio or the local news for the latest updates. If you have evacuated, return home only when officials say it is safe. Once home, drive only if necessary to avoid flooded roads and washed out bridges. If you must go out, watch for fallen objects in the road, downed electrical wires, and weakened walls. Bridges, roads, and sidewalks might collapse. Walk carefully around the outside of your home to check for loose power lines, gas leaks, and structural damage. Stay out of any building if you smell gas, if flood water remains around the building, and if a building or home was damaged by the fire or if the authorities have not declared it safe. Carbon monoxide poisoning is also one of the leading causes of death after storms in areas dealing with power outages. And they also say never use a portable generator inside your home or garage. Review generator safety, use battery-powered flashlights, and do not use candles. Now, that was some great information by the National Weather Service. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close our show out. I want to say thank you so much, Braden, for coming in
Mhm.
and really just showing us some great information and some great insights. It's always great to have you on the show. And as always, I can't wait to see you all back here next week. Thank you for coming into this week's Weekend Weather Talk.